Call the Marathon County Public Safety Committee meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, October 7th. We have a quorum. We have 2 people excused. And the first item that we will do is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. Number 3, public comment. Is there any public comment? Did you get anybody? Okay. Do we have anybody online? Okay. Thank you. All right. Item 4, approval of the minutes from September 9th, 2025. Jason, motion by Jason. Is there a second? Second by Deb. Any discussion or changes? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. And we're going to skip to 6A for the Sheriff's Department, Sheriff's Office update on data related to calls for the service at Central Wisconsin Airport.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry I didn't get my memo in the packet. As we were working through getting this on the agenda, I completely spaced it. Part of that is because we had hoped to actually do this presentation several months ago. We had actually had this data ready back in July, but as meetings came and meetings got joined and other things got in the way, it just got pushed back to today. So the data that you're seeing is in response to the concerns that were brought before this committee back in September of 2024. And if you recall at that time, the Mosinee Police Department had come and had discussed some of the challenges that they had and the staffing concerns they had surrounding the airport and the calls for service at the airport. The direction that this committee gave us going forward was that you asked that we bring together a group, we examine the data, we work with staff at the airport, and we work with Director Grafey on that, and understand exactly what the calls look like at the airport. Now, the one thing I want to mention, and you'll see it at the top of the memo that I have here, is that I understand why the chief came and looking at data had this idea that, oh my God, we look at this data, there's so much there. And I would caution you that anytime you get data from the sheriff's office and you're looking at what we call CAD data, RMS data, that data, if you don't know what you're looking for and you don't know what you're looking at, can be incredibly confusing. As an example, if we get a call for a medical emergency somewhere here in the city of Wausau and it requires multiple units, you're going to have a call for fire, you're going to have a call for an ambulance, and you're going to have a call for a police officer often. That generates 3 calls for one incident. What comes out of that, the work product that comes from that, can be something completely different. It might be a police report that generates a case number. It could be an ambulance run that they have, but it also could be that everybody shows up at the scene and they say, sorry, we didn't need you, and everyone leaves and goes back to what they were doing before that call. So as we looked at the data, what we learned was in 2024, the City of Mosinee Police Department took 208 calls for service in our CAD system at Central Wisconsin Airport. At face value, that reflects about 3% of the total calls for service that the Mosinee Police Department takes across their entire police department. But if you dig down into the data and you look at what those calls for service were for, and I'm referring now to the chart that was put together. This chart was actually put together by our data officer, Michael Schultz, who did all of the examining of the data for us. So we provided her raw data and she went through and helped clean it up for us. Of those 208 calls, 48 of those calls were just testing of alarms at Seaway. They show up in our CAD system as alarms because they come in, but they're just testing alarms. So take those out of the 208. 8 of them were community relations events. This means that someone went there in order to maybe welcome the honor guard, I'm sorry, not the honor guard, the honor flight back from one of their missions. It might have been one of the presidential visits that took place at the airport. And don't get me wrong, those are labor intensive, but those are, quite frankly, voluntary. You don't have to do them, we don't have to do them. 19 of those calls were extra patrol call source self, which means that an officer may have, this what it means for the sheriff's office, drove through the parking lot, did a drive around and went, looks good, log it that I was here, and then you leave. Likewise, the business security check would be one step further, where maybe you got out of your car, you walked into the business, did a walk around, or you shook a door. That's what we would do in the rural parts of the county, where we may stop and check a town hall or one of our local businesses and we'd shake a door or walk around the building. That would be those calls for service. One of them was a controlled burn, so the airport was probably cleaning up brush. They called in and said they were going to be burning some brush. And one of them was a traffic stop on or near the property at Central Wisconsin Airport. That accounts for 106 of the 208 calls for service. So those are things that are officer initiated, are not a citizen calling, are not the airport calling and saying, hey, we need help, we need an officer here. So if you strip those out, you'll look in that upper right box, you'll see that there were 102 calls for service at the Central Wisconsin Airport, resulting in about 15% of all of the calls that the city of Mosinee took in 2024. So of those 102 calls, if you remember, there was some concern about the overnight calls and the things that came in after hours. So of those 102 calls, of the calls that came in overnight, there were 7 of them. One was a vehicle lockout, so somebody got back from their flight, went to their vehicle, and they locked their keys in their car, and somebody had to go get them out. One was a service miscellaneous. What that typically looks like is somebody left an item at the airport. They left it with TSA, and TSA says, hey, we're not going to hang on to this. Can somebody come and grab this? Or there's a found ID. It can be a lot of little things like that. A criminal miscellaneous, when you see a call flagged as that, that means that it's a more serious event and likely resulted in a police report of some kind. A 911 hang-up call is what I'm sure you're very familiar with. And then we have a medical emergency in there. So we have a couple of 911 hang-up calls and a couple of service miscellaneouses and a medical emergency. That's the 7 calls. So if you go even deeper into the data and you say, well, of the 208 calls that we've now pared down to 102 calls, how many of those calls resulted in the taking of a case number? A case number is, there's an offense here, somebody needs to see a report, whether it's DA Mayo and his staff or an insurance company because of a traffic crash, whatever it might be. There were 21 calls for service that actually resulted in the need for a police report. So when you hear those numbers initially, and I thought we all sat in this room and heard, oh my gosh, 208 calls for service. When you really dig into the data and you weed through it, you find out that, yes, they were there. They probably had some part in it, a lot of it self-initiated, but then a few of them are actually requests for services from the police department. Now, I forwarded this report to Chief Grams back in July. He's had it for a period of time. I asked him to reach out to me with any concerns. We touched base a few times since then, not about this. So I just, in case you asked the question, has he reached out? Have I talked to him? Not about this specifically. What I will tell you is that I have shared with the chief, and this has always been a standing offer, whether it's the city of Mosinee, Stratford, Spencer, Athens, Edgar, Wausau, Mountain Bay, it doesn't matter. If they have something big going on and they need help, all they got to do is call. So if we have another dignitary visit at the airport and they need assistance from us for the president comes to town or the vice president or whoever it might be, let us know. We're there to help. Same goes for any of our municipal partners. We're always there to assist them in the event there's something that arises and they can't get there. The other thing I'll tell you is that there is a mutual aid agreement in place between the Cronin-Winter Police Department and the Mosinee Police Department, so that in the event Mosinee is busy, we have automatic mutual aid set up so that Cronin-Witter can be dispatched immediately without the need for all of the extra work that goes into, and sometimes it's just a matter of just saying it on the radio, but requesting an officer from another municipality come in the event they're not there. So I know I went through that pretty quick, but I wanted to give you an overview of what we found in researching the data, and I apologize that it took so long to bring it back to you.
Any questions for the sheriff? Guess not. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on. Number 5, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. 5A, discussion and possible action by public safety. 5A1, overview of highlights of the 2026 annual budget with respect to the departments and organizations over which the committee has jurisdiction.
All right, I'll take it away, Madam Chair. Thank you. I don't think I'll be as brief as Sheriff Billup, but I also will spare you the 1 hour and 45-minute presentation that was made to HR Finance. I think it was over the weekend, sent an email with a link both to the presentation and the budget document to all board members. So this is really consistent with the budget process that has been laid out and discussed at the board and certainly discussed at HR Finance, where you continue to have the opportunity to really dive in and ask questions of the budget. And ultimately, as I'll talk about in just a minute, you'll have the opportunity to continue to impact the budget before its ultimate adoption. In terms of high-level overview, I'll start with, this is very consistent with all the presentations that I've given to the committees to this point, and I apologize for those of you that have sat through it before. But our process over the last several years has really been trying to be aimed at giving the board that opportunity early and often to provide direction in the budget process. And I certainly appreciate the revised process because it gives administration and our team of department heads and staff guidance in putting that process and putting that budget together. So our team, I'm very happy to report through the direction we've received from beginning with your budget assumptions and your budget priorities. We were able to follow all those and deliver a budget that met all of the guidance that you provided, as well as through your individual departments, through the individual committees, some additional guidance that you provided. So high-level overview, this is really a status quo budget. There's not fundamentally any dramatic expansion of programs or new programs apart from, I'll highlight 2, and one is the relates to the airport, and that is the minimum revenue guarantee program, the contingent funding on funding coming from also Portage County and some other sources. That is referenced in the budget, and then also some enhanced funding to address the growing challenge of homelessness in the community. So apart from those things, status quo budget, the message that I gave to department heads is one of, to meet the goals of the county board, it's going to require some shared sacrifice. And some of those budget meetings were a bit challenging, and we certainly left no stone unturned, for lack of a better turn of phrase. But I'm very proud of the budget that our team delivered to you and to the county board. Again, not to go through all of the budget priorities, they are in the document, and the budget proposed document is on the website. Again, you can utilize that link I sent in the email along with the link to the video presentation where we go through the budget. Myself, Deputy Administrator Holman, and Finance Director Fensky go through that presentation. I'm just going to highlight a couple of pieces today. In terms of shared sacrifice, the top priority that the board identified was consistent with your strategic plan, and the direction of the board is really implementing that compensation update. That was no small feat. In terms of new money within the budget, all of you know that we're permitted to increase the operational tax levy by net new construction. When you look at net new construction for Marathon County this year, I referenced it in the budget document, 1.61%, so lower than we've historically had. Not significantly such, still a strong number relative to the state. I believe it's ranked 19th, but I referenced that in the budget. What that amounts to in terms of new money is about $837,000. When you account for the additional funding from a personal property tax modification or the adjustment, it's about $1 million. And as I'll talk about, and as demonstrated in the later portions of this budget, department heads did an exceptional job. For context, 17 of the 26 departments that you fund annually through the budget came in with a tax levy request that was flat relative to 2025 or down. So really, they did an exceptional job of looking for those opportunities to do all of the things that you identified as the board in the budget priority document and budget assumption document. Those things are looking for opportunities to be more efficient, looking to align revenues, non-tax revenues, to programs to maximize those opportunities, looking for service delivery changes to do things, again, more efficiently, but also importantly, very importantly, cost effectively when you're looking at the budget. So I will just then go through one of the primary ways that we did balance the budget, and I referenced this before, is through holding open positions or defunding positions in the budget. And I go through in detail and list out approximately 15, the equivalent of 15 FTEs across the county that are going to be held open. I'm very proud of the departments for their work in doing that. In some departments, like the sheriff's office, large department, approximately 200 employees, held open a number of positions through our budgeting. We're going to make sure we continue to deliver high levels of service across the county, similar to what Sheriff Billup just referenced, looking at really what are our service needs. But large departments stepped up to the plate, as did small. I'll give a big shout out to the Register of Deeds Department of 4. We're defunding, I'm defunding one position of 4 in my budget proposal that was accepted by HR Finance and Property. That's a big lift. I was just down there before coming to this meeting, and they currently have a vacancy, so they're down to 2 out of a department of 4 and still doing very well to deliver on our services to the public. So across the county, that was probably the biggest lift that we had in terms of implementing the priorities that were identified by the board. We also, as I said, followed all the budget assumptions. Conservative budget estimates with respect to sales tax, again, aligning fees. Those were all things that you gave direction in the budget assumption document. Each of those documents is included in the budget, so you'll see the total document is about 190 pages. Every year, we try to do a better job to be more transparent and provide more information to the board and also the public as to where our funds come from and how they're spent. And certainly that's important for the budget. So incorporating that budget priority document, the budget assumption document, they are in as appendices, as are the fee schedule for the county, and consistent with the direction the board provided, we really did across the board look at all of our fees and try to identify where is it appropriate to follow that direction from the board of increasing those fees in a corresponding amount to our increased cost to do business through compensation, benefits, and just generally cost increases. And where not, we really tried to make sure we answered those questions as to why those things perhaps were not appropriate. But in terms of highlights for the particular departments that you have, I'll start with the sheriff's office. I already referenced the fact that we held open a number of positions. One of the biggest challenges in the sheriff's office, from my perspective, 24/7 operations are hard. Not that retaining people in any area is necessarily easy at this point. Central Wisconsin, the state as a whole is very competitive. We have a very low unemployment rate. It just ticked up statewide to 3%. That was up just a tick from its lowest on record of 2.9. Central Wisconsin is even more competitive. Our unemployment rate is 2.6. That might not sound like a big difference, but when you're talking about small numbers, the difference between 2.6 and 3.0 is pretty significant. And that's not surprising. There are a number of help wanted signs. Even if you're not good at golf from this building, you can probably hit 3 help wanted signs with a sand wedge. So it's a challenging environment, but 24/7 operations are particularly challenging. That's not new as well with respect to the jail, communications, and certainly our work in law enforcement. So trying to be as innovative as we can, I again referenced in working with the sheriff and his team and our finance team, really looking at what can we do differently. Credit to that team for looking at some other vendors as it relates to one of our real challenges is out of facility supervision. So things like when we have an inmate that requires medical care, if they're in the hospital, we need to not only transport them there, but depending on the nature of the care they need, we may need to sit there for hours, perhaps days. And that can be a real challenge operationally to do. So Sheriff's Office continues to look for opportunities to do that in the most cost-effective way possible while still ensuring public safety. So those were some big changes. We're seeing across the board, but again, the Sheriff's Office is another great example. The cost to do business, service contracts, I think we're all feeling this in our personal life, right? You see what the cost of a service that maybe you've had for a number of years, and you see they go up by 10%, 15%. The cost of laptops is up about 15% over last year. Sheriff's Office is no different with some of their contracts. One of the things we looked at this year was cost for body cameras. And the Sheriff's Office put out an RFP for making a change. The increase between body camera costs and taser costs combined last year, and what was one of the proposals was up 300%. So those are challenging things, but again, the Sheriff's Office has done well to really take a look at all those contracts, see what the provisions are for price increases, and be as creative as possible. But overall, it's not surprising when you look at the net new construction we have. And so the amount of new money that's coming in between net new construction, the property tax adjustment, and increased projections in sales tax revenue that the board directed we adopt in the budget assumptions. And you look at the Sheriff's Office in and of itself, it's on page 173 of the budget document. I said between net new construction and our personal property tax adjustment we get, it's about $1 million of new revenue. You'll see the Sheriff's Office, our largest department, in and of itself, their difference between 2025 and 26 is 1.23 million. So that's all of that money. So it's a challenge. But again, all of our departments, when you look across the board, I think they did an exceptional job. But we did make some adjustments in terms of staffing and budgeting for vacancy that I'm confident we're still going to be able to deliver the high-quality services that the people of Marathon County have come to appreciate. But certainly budgets are tight in that regard. The next department that I'll reference that you have oversight over is the Clerk of Courts. And I should say every department continues to have a narrative section within the budget. So if you want to know what the highlights were from 2025 and what they are kind of putting on what do they see on the horizon in 26, every department's got a couple of pages where they lay out their mission, how they're organized in terms of an org chart. It has their annual budget summary in there. but it also has that 2025 and 2026 information, those highlights. Feel free to navigate to those. But Clerk of Courts, one of the positive areas that we saw in the state budget that did assist in developing the county budget this year was some changes at the state level for the partnership and funding for courts. So we saw a slight increase in that funding that we were receiving from the state of Wisconsin. They increased the support we get, the annual allocation we get to operate the state courts by about $10,000, a little over $10,000 for each branch. So we have 6 branches, so we got about a little over $60,000 in new money based on those court branches. So you'll see their difference. They were one of the departments that were actually down. That's a function of that additional state court funding. And we also defunded a position within that office. We had a vacancy, and I challenged the clerk of court and the judges to find ways to be more efficient. And they, in that spirit of shared sacrifice, certainly stepped up to the plate. So their tax levy difference from 25 to 26, they're down about just shy of $60,000. The next department that falls under the jurisdiction of this body is the district attorney's office. Again, one of those departments that is a bit unique in terms of, similar to the clerk of court's office, in that it's really a function of a partnership with the state of Wisconsin. A little bit different than the clerk of courts in that we actually have people within the district attorney's office that are state employees that we are providing office space to and providing some level of support for, but we actually then have county staff that provide that support. So nuanced difference there, but certainly similar in that the clerk of court staff are county employees as well. Unfortunately, the state the district attorneys didn't get the benefit that the clerk of courts got with enhanced funding from the state of Wisconsin. We didn't see an influx of money. We were really hoping, Wisconsin Counties Association did a nice job of advocacy around victim witness funding to try to get that partnership to be more on the state side, but that was not incorporated into the biennial state budget. So this is an area where we have seen costs to deliver services, whether that's interpretation or translation or just general support that's required. And of course, the wages to retain staff are up. So the district attorney's office across the board, overall within their budget's up about $62,000. I would, again, give a lot of credit to staff there. Tightened, we certainly looked at all of the opportunities to continue to make sure we're doing a good job in pulling in revenue. Had a good conversation about what I think is one of the most innovative programs in the state relative to court operations, and that's our prelim testifier program. So more information than you want to know, but back years ago when we used to have preliminary hearings, which if you're charged with a felony, every defendant is entitled to a preliminary hearing within 20 days, should they choose to have it, in lesser time if they're incarcerated. But we historically used to have law enforcement officers from all the jurisdictions come and testify. And that can be a real challenge for law enforcement. If you think about an officer that maybe works the night shift, worked the night before, and they get called in to testify, they're on overtime for that municipality. So it's costly, it's a challenge operationally. With some changes in the law that happened a number of years ago, our district attorney's office worked collaboratively with those municipalities to have an innovative approach where we actually employ a part-time individual to read those police reports, and with the change in law, they can testify to what they read in those police reports. So the idea of that position is that the county essentially fronts the cost of that position, and then during the year, we keep track of utilization by the various municipalities, and we apportion the cost out, and we bill those municipalities for the cost of that. This is an area where we really, I know District Attorney Mayo is very committed to making sure that we're actually billing out our full cost to deliver that program. It's a big benefit to the municipalities. It's also a benefit to us. It's much easier to operate in terms of you don't have to do a pile of subpoenas to get to those law enforcement officers or notices to have them there. You essentially can do all of your witness prep quite significantly easier than if you would otherwise do it. But again, across the board, I think that department as well really looked and dialed in their budget to the extent possible. And I'm hopeful that we'll have better luck next biennial budget to get the state to, I'd say, do a better job keeping up their share of the respective bargain on operating and supporting district attorney's offices. I would say the state did a nice job of continuing to fund pay progression for district attorney's offices. That's really vitally important. Think back to my time as a prosecutor. It was really hard to retain staff and certainly recruit staff when, bluntly put, the state didn't keep pace with what it needed to pay those lawyers to do that work. Thankfully, the state's made a lot of progress in that regard. And then the last department I'll talk about, again, that reports to this committee, you've heard a lot about them over the last year, and that's the medical examiner's office. So we've made the transition from a lay-led office to a physician-led office with the opening of the Forensic Science Center. Their tax levy, you'll see, is up 25 to 26, only slightly, just shy of $40,000. I would say their overall budget, though, is up significantly, and part of that is staffing. I mean, when you adopted the 2025 budget, you didn't have 3 positions within the medical examiner's office that you have now. 2 of those are doctors. A chief medical examiner who's a forensic pathologist, and then the deputy chief medical examiner who is also a forensic pathologist. This isn't going to surprise anyone. Those are expensive positions. And then also you have an autopsy support staff person. So they've done well, again, to align grant funding and seek out that grant funding. We're also budgeting for increased revenues from other counties. For the autopsies we anticipate performing, I do envision giving this committee frequent updates on the operations of the Forensic Science Center. Simply put, we got to make that business run because, as I opened with, there's not new tax levy that is available to subsidize that program. And I know Dr. Schupner is committed to doing that, as well as Jess Bolanek, her position is transitioned to Director of Operations because, again, now we're a physician-led office. So that's a high level kind of across the board for the departments that report to you. As you can see, again, from the document, as I referenced, the majority of the departments actually were able to, based on really diving in and highlighting, maximizing, I should say, other revenue streams and increasing fees, able to come in with a tax levy that is flat or down. But we do have some areas where we just don't have the ability to do that. And not all departments are created equal in terms of their ability to generate outside revenue. So, the last thing I wanted to end with. I referenced when I started that this was the county board's budget from the day we really started as staff putting it together. That is absolutely true. The budget is not done. You still have, there's quite a bit of time before the budget hearing and then, of course, budget adoption in early November. One of the areas that I encourage you to watch the presentation, and Deputy Administrator Holman laid this out relative to our capital approach with respect to the budget. We had initially in our capital request process over $10 million that came in terms of anticipated capital requests. You'll recall in some of the presentations we made, in light of the fact that we did not have any money roll over into the capital improvement fund from fund balance based on strategic use of reserves that was approved by the board in really in two primary areas. One was a loan out of the general fund to Bug Tussle for internet expansion, and two was the use of reserves during the budget adoption process for the 2025 budget. We didn't have any funds roll over into capital. Ultimately, we paired our capital, what we're funding, we modified our approach because funds weren't available to truly only funding the most critical projects. Historically, over the last several years, the direction we got was to fund end of life, routine maintenance, and increase our rolling stock, that is our vehicles and other things, increase that funding to keep pace with inflation. We really had to pare that back. And I encourage you to watch Chris's portion of that presentation where he goes through that in detail. We got that number down to about $5 million of capital that is part of the budget that is now in the hands of the HR Finance and Property Committee. What that means is simply put, you have a lot of deferred maintenance, right? We took projects that would have been moved forward in 2026 and we pushed those out. The critical projects that we funded were those things that relate first and foremost to IT infrastructure. This doesn't surprise anyone, I'm sure. It's similar to what you see in your private life if you're employed in the vast majority of businesses. IT is absolutely critical. We need, we can't put off replacing the things that we need. We need to make sure that our security software is up to date and that that's maintained. So we funded critical IT infrastructure and critical IT security. The other thing we funded was road projects. And you might ask why. We could certainly put off road projects. But recall again how our state aids, our general transportation aids are calculated. What you spend on an annual basis drives for the next 6 years what the county is going to receive in general transportation aid. So the direction we had was to fund, or the approach we took, I should say, it was to fund transportation projects to the extent needed to maintain and protect future general transportation aids. That's essentially it. So when you look in your budget, and it starts on page 171, that's the capital improvement plan, where we lay out what was proposed and what is ultimately funded. You have a lot of deferred maintenance that was moved to 26 and beyond. So as the board continues and the committees continue to work through the budget process, you have a lot of options. My only advice as you work through that, please don't hesitate to reach out with questions to myself or Sam, as particularly now as our next corporation council starts later this month. But in the interim, if you have questions, certainly reach out to the two of us. But if you do increase revenue projections in some area or make modifications to the budget that decrease costs to essentially free up funds, I would strongly advise that you look at moving those over into capital, because those capital projects aren't going away. Simply because we didn't plan to fund them in 26 does not mean the project doesn't need to move forward at some point. And the other piece I'll say relates to the highway shop. And I know that's not the direct purview of this committee, but I brought it up at every one of the other standing committees I've spoken about the budget at. One of the recent actions of the board was to designate $30 million of the highway reserve toward that project. And I know a number of supervisors have reached out to me over the last several months and asked, is there any way that we could move forward with this highway facility relocation and not have to borrow? And I appreciate that the board, for a great many years, certainly throughout my tenure, has been hesitant to borrow. We did borrow a number of years ago for about about $100 million worth of projects. But limiting the need to borrow is certainly something that I appreciate, and I appreciate that the board wants to make sure it's good stewards of tax dollars and minimizes the impact on the taxpayer. So I do think there's an opportunity where if we're strategic, we can perhaps move forward with the highway shop relocation without having to go out for additional borrowing. And why is that important? Because I think everyone knows the cost of borrowing, bond counsel and interest is expensive. And again, I talk about this in the full presentation to HR Finance, but if the project, for round numbers, to keep it easy, is $50 million, and I think I would be happy if ultimately the project was $50 million. I think that's a fair estimate, certainly for purposes of this discussion. You have $30 million designated right now. We don't have general fund dollars to pledge for that project, but what you do have is you previously borrowed, and up on the screen is page 15 from the budget book. And right now you have a total of, in 2026, you'll have $7.7 million of previously incurred general obligation debt that you will pay. $4,714,894 is proposed to be serviced by debt levy. The remaining $3 million, North Central services that debt. It's built into their budget to service that $3 million in debt. So they essentially take their $3 million in cash and put it towards that debt. Again, this bonding has already happened. You borrowed this money. A number of the issuances, and they're on the next page, all of the individual debt schedules, but a number of those debt issuances happened with interest rates between 1% and 2%. That is really good. You borrowed money, the county borrowed at a very advantageous time for a significant portion of that debt. Some of the other borrowing is between 3 and 4, still a very strong interest rate. I think we would be happy to have. If you had to go out to borrow, if you got between 3 and 4% right now, that would be great. So to illustrate the impact of that, the idea is if you could take the $3 million from North Central, transition that general obligation debt to debt levy, take the $3 million and use that to not have to go borrow to move the highway shop project forward, that could save money. And to put that in terms of what that means, if we again assume $50 million for a highway shop, $30 million is already designated through the highway reserve, that leaves $20 million. If you went out to borrow for $20 million over a 20-year term, the total interest that the county would pay is $6.89 million. If that's at 3%, which again, I think is a very strong rate. If I were a betting human, I wouldn't bet you would get 3% if you went out to borrow. If that rate is 4%, that amount goes to $9.4 million in interest. And if it's 5%, it's $12.1 million. So if we're strategic in how we approach capital financing, we still need to work, Sam and I need to work with our financial advisors to put that plan together. But the rough outline would be, if you transition some of that funding, some of that debt service to debt levy, take the cash to pay for the project, you can avoid borrowing. And that's just the interest rates, the interest costs that I was referencing. That doesn't include bond counsel costs as well. So all that to say that if, as the board further considers the budget, if there are modifications made and funding is freed up, whether it's increased revenue projections or changes in expenditures, I would strongly advise to make sure we keep our eyes on the capital needs that the county has moving forward, because those aren't going away. So I see you have a question. Go ahead, Supervisor.
Thank you. Where would the money be coming from to upfront to cover the $20 million?
Well, the project itself, and this is where I would need to sit down, we still need to do a lot of planning, but the project, if the board approves moving forward, and you haven't done that yet, taken a lot of incremental steps, but we haven't hit that go, no-go point. But assuming if you do that, the design is going to take in excess of a year. Construction is going to take in excess of a year. So if you assume essentially a 3-year period, a portion of before you'd have to pay all of the bills, the idea would be to maximize as much. If you look at, let's just say you started it in 27, assuming North Central can service the full amount of debt that they're able to do, which is a big assumption, but you have 3.5 million in 27, 4.13 million in 28, and another 4 million in 29. That gets you're already well over 10 million. This is where, so that gap, to your point, is something that I think Sam, our financial advisor, and I would sit down and put together. But it's a big opportunity to avoid that $6.89 million. That's if you get 3%. That would be a much better deal for the taxpayer to not have to incur those costs, but it will take some financial planning, I think, to your underlying point. Because you'd have the 30 million from highway reserves. So the board has already designated that. So that leaves that $20 million gap, which is also a big assumption. I don't know how much it's going to cost. Nobody does until we actually bid the project and finish it. But just for purposes of discussion, I brought that up at every committee. Because it is if you look to your peer counties, there's a number of counties that have done big projects recently. St. Croix County, for example, built a government center that was, I believe it was $80 million. That can have a huge impact on levy. When you go out to borrow, so you have the borrowing costs, you have the interest costs, and then that new debt gets put on debt levy, you already have existing debt, general obligation debt, that you're servicing, at least in part, with payments from North Central Healthcare. The same is true with the airport. The airport's about to retire some debt. Those are opportunities that it's a great thing to have when you have, like the airport, for example, that's not on the tax levy. If you can strategically use that debt, but particularly the North Central debt right now, I think that's the opportunity for the board to potentially avoid having to borrow more to complete that project.
I got a question in relation to that too. So, how much? So, if you take off the 30 million, how much fund balance do we have left that's actually available? So the state requires to have so much in there, but how much is left after that? I'm just curious on that.
Sure. Great question. So at a recent board meeting, we passed out a hard copy of a document that's titled Guide to Government Budgeting and Fund Balances. And we tried to go through that exercise to lay out what does your fund balance policy lay out and require, not only for the general fund, but also for the highway fund. And we tried to highlight the existing encumbrances to that. And if you bear with me for just a moment, I can open that on my computer. The short answer is, with respect to general fund, as I referenced before, you already aren't, based on our use of the general fund reserves in, as part of the 2025 budget and the loan to Bug Tussle, you actually fall below the fund balance policy that the board adopted. As it relates to the highway fund, when you go through and highlight the $30 million designation as well as future spending out of the money that you need to keep in there for projects that have been awarded but won't hit the budget until later. Sam, what are we down to, like $64,000? I can't pull it up, but it's 64,000. So short answer, not a lot. More will come in. I mean, I think that's the thing, the plan would have to be refined. I laid that out at a high level. There are a ton of assumptions built in there. Big one, it's 50 million. Big one, North Central Healthcare can service their debt. But also there are some things that could positively impact that. I mean, we could have more funds come into highway reserve and then we just alter that long algebra equation about what funnels into the total project cost. But the reason I bring it up in every meeting, and I know the infrastructure oversees the highway department, but this is a big opportunity. And, you know, I've talked with my peers. I can't think of another county that has the opportunity to, you know, if you're strategic, to look at a building that's $50 million and not have to borrow for that. That's a big deal. Like I said, I know St. Croix County borrowed for their government center, and I believe that total cost was $80 million. Wood County recently, a number of years ago, I don't know how long, Chad, they built their new jail, just opened, and so they've been building that for a number of years. I want to say the total cost on that was in the same area, about $80 to $90 million. Those things, they're big expenses. Counties use bonding to pay for those, but they do have a big impact on the levy, because that's where they go, is once you borrow, they go on the debt levy, generally. Yeah.
So in relation to the, on the fines and the forfeitures and penalties, I was looking on the pie graph there. It said there was 0%, but then when you look down further in the budget, it was like 525,000. Is that figured into the budget or no?
Yeah, the math, the total county budget is down a little bit from last year, primarily because you aren't spending as much on capital. But the reason it says 0% is because the budget's still $185-ish million, and $500,000 is a lot of money, but it still isn't greater than 1%. So is that fair to say, Sam? Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Supervisor Hoppe.
This question goes back a little bit in your presentation, but ARPA funding is about over, correct? And I think there's still some still being used. I mean, it was committed for a long time ago, so it's still kind of finishing up. But are the cuts that were made, are a lot of them from what the ARPA money was paying for previously in the last couple of years? Or are these just past positions or whatever? Does that make sense?
Sure, I think so. The answer is, we didn't fund, the county did not fund positions with American Rescue Plan Act dollars, but for one. And that was in the district attorney's office. It was for a victim witness position. And the county board has been very clear with grants, and that's how we treated ARPA funds, that when the grant goes away, the position goes away. So all of the defunding of positions, all the positions that were not funded as part of the 2026 budget aren't really ARPA related apart from that position. So those are positions that would otherwise need to be funded with levy or other tax-related funds like sales tax. So our funding, our use of ARPA, the county's use of ARPA that you adopted over the last several years, I think was very financially astute. You used one-time money for one-time expenditures. If you look through, it's on page 14 of your budget. You paid for capital projects because generally speaking, you don't need to fund that same capital project for a long time. So that mitigated the need to, I think, to get to the heart of the question, it's not position based that, hey, it's a recurring expense. You updated things like our courtrooms, the first project on the list. Our courtrooms, the audio video systems were not where they needed to be, and that, you know, again, this funding came during the pandemic, and the board approved significant investments in those to decrease costs, hopefully, in the long run, but also make some very much needed investments in the infrastructure. You funded a radio projects, radio upgrades, the Forensic Science Center. All of those things, generally speaking, are capital. So the positions are not impacted by that. I will say with the capital project funding, we did claw back. We anticipate having some of the ARPA money that isn't expended. The projects come in under budget, which is a good thing. We anticipate a number of them to come in under budget. We use that funding as part of the overall plan to fund the $5 million of capital projects that we need, those critical projects. That's being used as part of the 2026 budget to do that. Certainly, you don't have another $5 million worth of funding that is available. That would be great to have, but we do anticipate, I think we budgeted $500,000 of unspent ARPA at this point.
That's really excellent, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Now, with the sheriff's department is going to have a 1 point some million dollar increase in tax levy. Now, with the fee increase, how much of the fee, how much money is going to be sent to the sheriff's department with fee increases?
I don't know if I can answer that today. We did look at all of their fees. I know Chad, Sheriff Billup and the chief deputy and their team looked through and we made changes to their fees. One of the positive areas, and there are a number of them, but one of the most positive areas that I think we've really seen a significant improvement in terms of how we manage that and our strategy and the financial performance is at the juvenile detention center. I would say one of the other areas in their budget that makes it look like they cost more money, but they don't, is I believe we transferred $25,000 from social services to the sheriff's office to essentially hold a space within the juvenile detention center for Marathon County youth. I see Sam is checking her color-coded book to hold me accountable to the amount of money.
Closer to 90.
Yeah,
Oh, see, even,
$91,250.
so way off. I was off a factor of 4. So $94,000 of that 1.2 million is actually just a transfer. And you'll see social services, if you go to the end there, really strong job on the budget as well, but a big part of their decrease was that funding that Sam just referenced.
And then another question. So we take money, was it 2026 is coming from 2024, isn't it? For capital improvement?
Yeah, for CIP.
So like on the contingent fund, for example, in 2024, we used $26,000. We allocated $800,000.
Yep,
Now that money would have gone into capital improvement projects if we did not use it.
correct. So it goes into the working capital. So you have your general fund. This is why I think the document that Sam and Candace put together really is helpful, that guide to government budgeting. It goes into your general fund reserves. You then do a working capital calculation to say, how much do you need to hold to essentially serve as the county's checkbook, right? We need to issue checks. We don't get all of our money at the same time. We need to have like businesses need to be able to, have cash on hand. We do that working capital designation. That's between 25 and 30% is what the board adopted as part of their policy. We do that calculation. Any amount above that in the year following the audit rolls into fund capital. So as part of the 2024 audit, when we close the 2024 books, to your point, all that audit was completed. They did the working capital designation and you fell below, the amount in the fund fell below that designation. So you had no money roll over. So you're right, the county board didn't allocate and didn't expend a significant amount of contingent funds in '24. But in 2024, there was an $8 million loan to Bug Tussle. And then also as part of the 2025 budget, in excess of $1.6 million of reserves, general fund and highway reserves combined, was used to buy down the tax rate. Those two things really drove kind of that outcome of no dollars being available for capital. $800,000 is a lot. $9.6 million is more.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. I actually have a comment first. Thank you for the links in your email. I've utilized them a couple of times already. If you have not listened to the presentation that he gave for the Finance Committee, I would definitely do that. I did that yesterday. I plan on doing it again. It's hard to catch everything the first time. So my question is, what are we doing with the buildings on River Drive?
That's a great question. So the HR Finance and Property, and this is it's certainly budget adjacent, so I think we're good to proceed with a little bit of discussion on it. The HR Finance and Property Committee, as part of its discussions, going back even to the development of the 2025 budget, the idea was divest, that is sell or redevelop those properties, not only on River Drive, but also Thomas Street, as well as the dorm. And you've actually sold some other properties. You sold a parking lot adjacent to the UW. You sold 2 group homes. The idea is the more you can do that as we get out of buildings, you can take those funds and put them into the general fund, and then they're available for capital, like Supervisor Wilhelm referenced. We anticipate, my goal is to have requests for proposals ready for redevelopment for the Thomas Street building, which is the former social services building, all of the buildings on River Drive. We already have one ready for the dormitory, and then also put the bones together for one for the UW campus. I don't know that I'll get the campus one ready, but all of the other ones will be, my goal is to have them ready for review by the committee by the end of the year. Because to the extent we can get those properties, the best scenario, right, is not only that you divest them for development that is consistent with the county's strategic plan and comprehensive plan, but also the city of Wausau's zoning and comprehensive plan for those areas, and you get paid, and you get them on the tax roll. I don't know how many of those 3 things you'll be able to check, if they'll all align. But again, the benefit is that you take those funds and put them towards your capital expense, kind of as Supervisor Sandelsky referenced, in my answer, that the math problem kind of changes if you have an influx of dollars, to, again, mitigate the need to otherwise borrow for capital expenses. But that's the plan. By the end of the year, have templates ready, and then have the committee and probably the board weigh in on the process for releasing those and then scoring them. The only challenge really is with the thing that's held up the process is we have a tenant that has been in the Thomas Street building, the credit union. There's a credit union that operates in that facility, and the IT that feeds the credit union runs through the River Drive buildings. So can't get rid of we need to pull our IT equipment out of River Drive before we could sell it. But the credit union is relocating. They purchased some new property, so they're relocating next year. The goal is the middle of the year.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any more questions? Okay, then, moving on. Thank you so much. Moving on to 5B, discussion and possible action by Public Safety to forward to the County Board for consideration, none. 7 committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. I've already gotten a couple. If there's anything else for next meetings, please let me know, or Lance. Next meeting is Tuesday, November 11th at 1:30. And number 8. Jason with the motion to adjourn. I need a second. And Al, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you guys coming.